Why do I still remember the sound of the wind that morning? Maybe because it wasn't just wind. It was the kind of sound that carries every choice you've ever made. The kind that whispers, "This is it." I lay on my stomach, the earth cold beneath my chest, the rifle pressed against my shoulder like an old friend I wasn't sure I'd see again. Through the scope, the world looked small, the target smaller still. 3 miles away, a man stepped into sunlight confident, untouchable. Abdul Rahman, the architect of too many explosions, too many widows. "Target acquired," I whispered, steadying my breath. The radio hissed in my ear. Sergeant Mason's voice cracked through the static. "Emily, that's not a shot, that's a prayer. Winds gusting at 40 plus, temperature shift 30 below. You're talking about a 3-mile kill shot, kid. No one ever done that." He wasn't wrong, no one had. But I wasn't thinking about records. I was thinking about the sound of my mother's voice when the bank called, the way my father stared at numbers he couldn't fix, the look in my little brother's eyes when I said I'd find a way to keep the ranch alive. This was my way. "Command, this is Overwatch 7, I said, my voice steady, though my heart thudded in my throat. "Requesting permission to engage primary target at extreme range." Static, then a voice I'd learned to recognize, Colonel Sarah Hayes. "Whitaker, confirm your range estimation." 4,800 meters, ma'am. Wind south-southeast, 42 knots, gusting 55. Coriolis adjustment compensated. A pause, long enough to feel my pulse in my fingertips. Then, "Whitaker, that exceeds maximum effective range by over 2 miles. No confirmed kill in military history beyond 2,700 meters." I exhaled slowly. "With respect, ma'am, no 18-year-old girl from Montana has been deployed to Afghanistan either, but here we are." That's the moment it began, the shot that would echo further than I ever imagined. But to understand how I got here, to that rock-strewn hill with a target I couldn't afford to miss, you'd have to go back. Before the rifle, before the uniform, before the nickname Whisper. Back to Montana. 6 months earlier, I was stacking hay bales under an endless sky that smelled of dust and rain that never came. My rifle leaned against a fence post, the same one my grandfather had once rested against. He'd always said rifles had memories, that the wood remembered the hands that held them. I used to laugh at that. I don't anymore. "Emily Grace Whitaker, you get those chores finished before you start target shooting," my mom called from the porch. Her voice carried that tired, half-angry tone parents use when they're scared more than they're upset. Our ranch, 3,000 acres of fatting dreams, was bleeding out. Cattle prices had crashed. The drought had stayed longer than the rainbows. And the bank wanted numbers my father didn't have. I lined up my sights on a prairie dog mound almost 900 yards out. Inhale, pause, squeeze. The crack echoed across the valley, and the animal vanished. "Show off," my brother Danny muttered, lugging a bucket of oats toward the horses. At 16, he was all broad shoulders and restless energy, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't match my shots. "Dad wants to know if you're coming to town," he said, squinting against the sun. "Recruiters holding some meeting, army or something." "Recruiter?" I asked, lowering the rifle. "Yeah, says they're looking for exceptional shooters. Mom thinks it might be worth hearing." I remember the way the horizon looked that day, endless, unforgiving. The sky went on forever, but our future didn't. So I went. That evening, the four of us sat around the kitchen table, the same table where 3 generations of Whitakers had planned harvests and argued over feed prices. Dad's hands were rough, his knuckles scarred from years of ranch work. He spread the bills and statements across the table like a dealer laying down bad cards. "The numbers don't lie," he said quietly. 6 months, maybe less, before the bank takes it." "I can pick up extra shifts," Mom said, her voice breaking but her chin high. "We've pulled through worse." The Army's offering signing bonuses, I blurted out. Good ones. They said exceptional shooters can qualify for specialized programs, better pay, education benefits. Dad's head snapped up. Emily, you're 18. You've never been farther from home than Billings. You think you can just pick up and... I can outshoot every hunter in 3 counties, I said, meeting his gaze. Grandpa always told me skill is currency. Maybe it's time I spent mine. Silence, long enough to hear the old clock chime 9 times. Finally, Mom spoke. What kind of programs? Sniper training, advanced marksmanship, special operations support. I tried to sound confident, but my voice caught halfway. Danny's eyes went wide. Like an actual military sniper school. Yeah, I said quietly, something like that. Dad stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the dying light. Your great-grandfather fought in World War II. Your grandfather served in Vietnam. I did 2 tours in Desert Storm. Military service changes you, Emily. Takes something from you, even when it gives something back. I swallowed hard. Maybe, but sitting here watching the ranch die is taking something from all of us. The next week, I sat across from a man named Sergeant Frank Thompson, Army recruiter. Sharp uniform, sharper eyes. The kind of man who could tell in 10 seconds if you were bluffing. When I handed him my shooting scores, 800-yard groups under 2 inches, 1-mile hits with a hunting rifle, he raised an eyebrow. These scores real. Every one. He whistled softly. You ever consider sniper school? I'm considering it now. Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying me. Sniper training isn't summer camp, it breaks people. The dropout rate's 70%. You think you're ready for that? I smiled just a little. Sergeant, I've been putting food on our table since I was 12. I don't break easy. That got me a qualifying shoot at Fort Harrison, the kind of invitation you don't turn down. But before I ever got to that firing line, something happened that changed everything. It was early morning, the kind of pale, golden dawn Montana does best. I found myself walking toward the old shed at the far end of the property. The one we never opened. Inside, dust floated like memories in sunlight. And in the back corner, half buried under old saddles and boxes, was a wooden trunk I'd seen before but never dared to open. My grandfather, Richard Whittaker. When I lifted the latch, the smell hit me, old leather, gun oil, time. Inside were medals, photos, and a small, worn journal. And that's when I realized something. My grandfather hadn't just fought in the war. He'd done something extraordinary. The journal was filled with calculations, ballistic tables, trigonometry, atmospheric corrections decades ahead of their time. Notes about ocular neural processing and temporal perception. Words that didn't belong to a farmer or even a regular soldier. Then a folded paper slipped free, a yellowed military report stamped classified. Lieutenant Richard Whittaker, it read. Designated marksman credited with elimination of Major General Wilhelm Richter at a confirmed distance of 1,750 yards. Engagement classified top secret. 1,750 yards. In 1944. That was impossible, not with the rifles they had back then. But somehow he'd done it. And no one had ever told me. There was also a compass, brass, scratched heavy with history. On the back, engraved in small, steady letters. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. R.W. I slipped it into my pocket. I don't know why. Maybe I needed something to hold on to. The next week, I stood on the firing line at Fort Harrison, surrounded by 23 other candidates, most of them men. College athletes, ROTC cadets, sons of soldiers. I was just a ranch girl with a beat-up Winchester .270. The redhead next to me, Madison Walker from Texas, looked at my rifle and smirked. Hunting rifle, cute. You'll be lucky to hold group past 600 yards. I smiled. Guess we'll see. The whistle blew. 200 yards. 400. 600. Each shot cracked through the mountain air, crisp and certain. By the time I reached 800, my 5-round group could be covered with a quarter. The instructors stopped talking. One of them, Master Sergeant Crawford, lowered his spotting scope and just stared at me. "Whitaker," he said slowly, "where'd you learn to read wind like that?" "Hunting elk in the mountains," I said. "You learn to read the wind or you go home hungry." Later that day, I faced 3 officers in a sterile conference room for my psychological evaluation. They asked about pressure, isolation, how I'd feel taking a human life. I told them the truth, that I'd been hunting since I was 12, that I knew what pulling a trigger meant, that some choices were heavy but necessary. Then the medical officer asked something strange. "Have you ever experienced unusual visual perception, depth awareness, exceptional reaction speed?" My heart skipped. They knew, somehow they knew. "I've always had good eyesight," I said carefully, "that's all." But inside, I felt that same unease I'd felt reading the words Artemis program in my grandfather's papers. That night, as I sat in a diner watching headlights pass outside, my phone rang. "Whitaker, this is Sergeant Thompson." His voice sounded different, excited, almost urgent. "I just got your scores. In 15 years of recruiting, I've never seen anything like this. Fort Benning wants to meet you, immediately." Fort Benning, the Army Marksmanship Unit. The place where legends are made. I said I'd think about it, but the truth was, I'd already decided. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just about saving a ranch anymore. This was about finding out why my grandfather's compass still pointed to something I couldn't see. And what kind of soldier it would turn me into when I found it. Why did Fort Benning feel so familiar the first time I saw it? Maybe because I'd already dreamed of it, not the buildings or the barracks, but the sense of order, of people who knew exactly who they were and what they were supposed to do. That wasn't me yet, but I wanted it to be. The Georgia heat hit me like a wall when I stepped off the transport bus. Sweat ran down my back before I'd even dropped my duffel. The air smelled like red dust, metal, and something sharp, discipline maybe. Drill sergeants shouted names faster than I could process them. Recruits scrambled like ants under a magnifying glass. I was 18, sunburned and wearing a uniform that didn't feel like mine yet. But deep down, I already knew I belonged here, even if no one else did. Basic training didn't start with rifles. It started with breaking. Breaking habits, breaking comfort, breaking the version of yourself that couldn't survive under fire. For most recruits, that breaking came through exhaustion. For me, it came through silence. I learned early that talking too much drew attention, the wrong kind. The girls in my platoon didn't trust me because I shot better than half the instructors. The guys didn't trust me because I was a girl who shot better than half the instructors. So I stayed quiet. Observed. Listened. Drill Sergeant Vegas, a compact woman with eyes like gunmetal, ran our weapons training. On my first day at the range, she barked, "Whitaker, step up. Let's see if that Montana legend holds water." The rifle felt different, shorter, colder, built for war instead of weather. But rifles don't lie. They only reflect the steadiness of the person holding them. "Targets at 300, Vegas said. "You hit 10 out of 10, I'll believe the rumors." I fired. 10 shots. 10 center hits. When I lowered the weapon, the range was silent except for the wind. Vegas walked over, picked up the target sheet and studied it. "First time firing an M4. "Yes, Sergeant." She paused. "You just scored expert on your first qualification." "I understand, Sergeant." "No," she said quietly, "you don't." She was right. I didn't understand, not yet, what that kind of precision meant inside the military machine. I thought it would earn respect. Instead, it drew attention. By week 3, my name was circulating beyond the training grounds. Instructors came to observe my shooting sessions. Officers I'd never met stopped by my lane and watched silently, taking notes. I pretended not to notice, but every time I pulled the trigger, I felt eyes on my back. One night after lights out, my bunkmate Jessica, a California girl with a sharp sense of humor and zero patience for nonsense, whispered, "You know you're a ghost story now, right?" I turned, "What do you mean?" "Recruits are saying you're some kind of prodigy, or a test case, or a lab rat, depends who you ask." I laughed softly. "Guess I'll take prodigy." "Yeah," she said, rolling onto her side. "Just remember, prodigies make great targets." I didn't sleep much after that. Weeks passed in a blur of drills, sweat, and shouted orders. And then, one morning, they pulled me aside. No explanation, no warning, just, "Whitaker, report to command at 900. The building was gray concrete and windowless, the kind that hums with air conditioning and secrets. Inside, a man in uniform waited behind a metal desk, silver hair, calm eyes that missed nothing. "Private Whitaker," he said. "I'm Colonel James Hayes, have a seat." I sat. He slid a file across the desk. My name was printed on the tab. "Do you know much about your grandfather's service?" My chest tightened. "Not really, sir. I know he served in World War II, that's about it." Hayes opened the folder and turned it toward me. Inside was a black and white photo, a younger version of my grandfather, standing with a rifle, smiling in that stoic, proud way soldiers do when they've seen too much but say nothing. "He was part of a classified program," Hayes said, "one that identified and studied individuals with certain, unusual aptitudes." He tapped the word stamped at the top of the file, "Artemis Program." I froze. I'd seen that word before, in the yellowed medical report from the trunk. "Sir, what is this?" I asked. Hayes leaned back. "The Artemis program began in 1943. It was built around a discovery, a rare genetic marker that affects how the brain processes visual and spatial information. People who have it can calculate distance, wind, and motion faster than normal human reflex allows. They see the world differently, process time differently." I swallowed hard, and my grandfather had it. "He was the first confirmed case," Hayes said. "His record-breaking shot in 1944 wasn't luck. It was science, instinct, and something we still don't fully understand. He was one of 7. They called them the Hunt Line." He let that hang in the air. I didn't know what to say. My heartbeat felt too loud for the room. "Your evaluation results triggered the same flag in our database," Hayes continued. "Your shooting, reaction time, cognitive mapping, all indicators of the same anomaly." I stared at the photograph again. "So what happens now?" Hayes folded his hands. "You have a choice. You can proceed through standard sniper training, or you can enter a specialized branch, a continuation of Artemis. It's more demanding, more secret, and more consequential." "What kind of missions?" "The kind that change outcomes," he said simply, "but they never make headlines." He leaned forward, his voice softening. "Understand this, Whitaker. People with your capabilities are rare. 1 in 5 million. The Army doesn't train you, it studies you. The question is, are you willing to be studied?" I thought of the compass in my pocket, the engraving. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. "Do I have a choice?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. "You always have a choice, but choices have gravity." He gave me 24 hours. That night I sat on my bunk, the base outside humming with life, recruits laughing, boots crunching gravel, a bugle echoing from somewhere distant. I turned the compass in my hands, feeling the weight of its history. If I said yes, I'd be walking the same shadowed path my grandfather had walked, a path erased from official records. If I said no, I'd still be a soldier, maybe even a great one, but some part of me would always wonder what I'd turned away from. Jessica noticed I hadn't moved in an hour. "You look like someone just handed you a classified file," she joked. I smiled faintly, something like that. "You gonna tell me what's in it?" "Not this one." She nodded. "Then whatever it is, make sure it's yours. Don't let anyone tell your story for you." She went asleep. I didn't. The next morning, I walked into Colonel Hayes's office and said the words that would define the rest of my life. "I'm in." He didn't smile, but I could see the approval in his eyes. "Good. Then we begin immediately." The Artemis training program wasn't like regular sniper school. They didn't shout, they didn't motivate, they observed. Every movement I made, how I aimed, how I blinked, how my pupils reacted to light was recorded. They drew my blood weekly, measured my heartbeat under stress, timed my reactions to moving dots on a screen. At first it felt clinical, cold. Then it felt personal, like they were peeling back layers of me I didn't even know existed. There were others too, 6 of us, all hand-picked. We rarely spoke, but we studied each other like predators sharing territory. There was Madison Walker, the redhead from Texas who'd smirked at my rifle at Fort Harrison. She was there too, quieter now, sharper. One afternoon, during a long-range drill, she walked over between sessions. "So this Artemis thing," she said under her breath, "they make you sign the same non-disclosure." "Yeah," I said. "Guess that means we're officially ghosts." "Guess so." We hit targets at impossible distances, ran simulations where time itself seemed to stretch and contract. The instructors spoke in whispers about neural acceleration and focus latency. I stopped trying to understand it. I just did what I'd always done: breathe, aim, fire. Weeks blurred into months. Some recruits broke. A few disappeared without explanation. Those of us who remained learned one truth: you could teach someone to shoot, but you couldn't teach them to see. By the end of the 8th week, my results surpassed every existing record. Wind compensation, accuracy, reaction time, all off the charts. Hayes called it predictive intuition. I called it something simpler: inheritance. One evening, after a long training session, Hayes found me alone in the observation chamber, staring at ballistic trajectories scrolling across a monitor. "Your grandfather once said something that's still written in his file," he told me. He said, "The bullet doesn't travel where you tell it. It travels where you already knew it would go." He paused. "You understand that now, don't you?" I nodded. "Yes, sir, I think I do." "Good," he said, "because we're sending you somewhere you'll need it." I turned to him, heart racing. "Where?" He looked at me, steady, unreadable. "Afghanistan." That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the hum of air conditioning blending with the pulse in my ears. I was 18 years old, barely out of basic training, and they were sending me into a war zone. Most people would have been terrified. I wasn't fearless, I was focused. Because something in me already knew this was inevitable. That all the roads, the ranch, the wind, the rifle, the secret file had been leading to one place. And that somewhere across the world, there was a shot waiting for me. One I'd already seen in my mind, long before I'd ever pulled the trigger. The first thing that hits you in Afghanistan isn't fear. It's the heat. It wraps around you like a living thing, thick, heavy, full of dust that clings to your skin and lungs. I'd grown up under Montana's wide skis, where the air was clean and the wind smelled of sage and rain. Afghanistan was the opposite. Dry, burnt, ancient. Like the earth itself was tired of watching people fight over it. Our helicopter touched down at Bagram Airfield just before sunrise. The sky was the color of gunmetal, and the mountains in the distance looked older than time. I pressed my hand against the small window as we descended, not out of wonder, but to ground myself. Somewhere down there, a version of me was about to die. The civilian version, the ranch girl, the daughter. The rest of me, the soldier, was about to take her place. First deployment. The question came from a man across the aisle, a sergeant from the 82nd Airborne, his uniform faded from too many tours. Yeah, I said. He gave a knowing smile. Word of advice, kid. Afghanistan'll show you what you're made of. Some of it you'll be proud of, some you won't. I didn't answer. He was right, I just didn't know it yet. The ride to Forward Operating Base Chapman took hours. We flew over valleys carved like scars into the mountains, over villages built from mud and sunlight. From above, it all looked peaceful. But peace here was a mirage, something you saw from a distance, never up close. When we landed, Staff Sergeant Rico Martinez was waiting for us. My team leader, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. His uniform looked lived in, his face lined not from age but from responsibility. He glanced at me, then at Marcus Webb, my spotter. Welcome to the sandbox. Chapman's your new home. It's not pretty, but it's ours. The base was smaller than I expected. A cluster of shipping containers, tents, and concrete barriers surrounded by miles of nothing. Dust coated everything, the ground, the walls, even the air. This way, Martinez said, leading us past soldiers cleaning weapons and repairing gear. You'll get used to the smell of diesel and sweat, maybe not the boredom. He wasn't joking. War isn't constant firefights or glory. Most of it is waiting, hours, days, for moments that last seconds but change everything. Our quarters were basic. 3 bunks, 1 shared desk, and a rack for weapons. I took the bunk nearest the door. Old habits die hard. On my pillow, someone had left a small brass name tag already engraved. PVTWHITAKER, OVRWHCH7. I ran my fingers over the letters, realizing this wasn't training anymore. It was real. That night, Martinez gathered us for our first mission briefing. Tomorrow, you'll provide overwatch for a patrol investigating weapons caches near a village called Kara, he said, tracing lines on a map. Intel says the Taliban's been using the valley for supply routes. You'll be positioned on Hill 472. Good visibility, bad cover. Distance to target area, I asked. 800 meters to the village center, Martinez replied. Expect civilians mixed with combatants. Positive identification before engagement. I nodded, copy that. He gave me a look I'd seen before. The one older soldiers give the young ones who still believe skill will keep them alive. Listen, Whitaker, he said. You're not on a range anymore. Out here the wind's got a heartbeat and the dirt's got memories. You miss once, people die. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He'd see soon enough. We moved out before dawn. The air was cold, the kind that cuts straight through body armor. Our gear weighed heavy: rifle, water, ammo, fear. But the silence between us was steady. Professional. Webb broke it first. Hard to believe this valley's been fought over for centuries. Feels like every rock's seen blood. Maybe, I said quietly, but it hasn't seen mine yet. We reached our overwatch position, a ridge overlooking Kara. Through my scope, I could see the village waking up. Women tending fires, children chasing goats, men carrying tools and rifles alike. War and routine, side by side. That's the thing no one tells you. Conflict doesn't erase normal life. It threads through it. Range to village center, I whispered. 780 meters, Webb replied, scanning through his spotting scope. Wind southeast 12 knots, temperature steady. The patrol entered the village. 12 soldiers. Lieutenant Cameron Foster led them, steady, cautious, the kind of man who measured twice before cutting once. Overwatch, this is Ranger 6, his voice crackled through comms. Beginning compound search. Maintain eyes on. Copy Ranger 6, I answered. Eyes on. Minutes passed. Then shouting. Running. A sound I'll never forget, metal clinking against stone. Weapons. Movement East Ridge, Webb said, his tone sharp. 5 figures armed, about 1,200 meters out. I shifted my rifle, glassing the ridge through the scope. There they were, silhouettes against the rising sun. One of them set down a long tube and knelt. RPG, I breathed. Ranger 6 overwatch. Hostiles preparing to engage. Permission to fire. Static, then Foster's voice, calm but tight. Permission granted. Engage. My world narrowed. Everything else, the shouting, the wind, the heartbeat in my throat, faded until there was only the target. Wind call distance, drop. 1,200 meters, slight crosswind, temperature differential. My finger found the trigger. I exhaled. Fired. The man with the RPG crumpled, weapon tumbling from his hands. Target down, Webb confirmed. But it wasn't over. The others scattered, firing blind toward our position. Rounds cracked against stone, sending shards flying. One chipped my cheek, drawing blood. Overwatch taking effective fire, Martinez barked into the radio. Ranger 6, extract immediately. For 20 minutes it was chaos, gunfire echoing through the valley, dust clouds rising like ghosts. I dropped 2 more targets. Webb called wind like he was born for it. Martinez coordinated our extraction through a hail of static. When it was over, silence returned, the kind that doesn't comfort, only reminds you what's missing. 3 confirmed kills. No friendly casualties. Mission success. On paper it was perfect. Inside it was. That night I sat on my bunk, staring at my hands. They were steady, too steady. They pulled a trigger that had ended lives, and they weren't even shaking. Webb found me there. He didn't say anything at first, just sat across from me, elbows on knees. You did good today, he said finally. Did I? You saved lives, Whitaker. Those guys would have turned that patrol into body bags. I nodded, but the words didn't stick. I keep seeing their faces. That's normal. Does it get easier? He hesitated. No, but you learn to carry it differently. He stood, hesitated again. You did your job, and you did it damn well. When he left, I stared at the compass in my hand. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. What did that mean now, when the heart was the part that hurt most? Over the next few weeks, our missions blurred together. Overwatch for convoys, recon for special operations, silent eliminations of targets whose names never made reports. Every success brought more attention. The girl sniper, they called me, the one who never missed. Whisper. At first it felt like pride, then it felt like pressure. Rumors started. Some soldiers said my shooting was luck, others said it was freak genetics. Both were wrong. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't a gift. It was something else, something that felt less like talent and more like a burden I didn't fully understand. One night in the mess hall, I overheard 2 soldiers talking. Whitaker, getting cocky, one said. 3 weeks in country and she thinks she's Annie Oakley. They laughed. I didn't confront them. They weren't wrong, not entirely. Confidence was creeping into arrogance, and arrogance gets people killed. I didn't want to be a story. I just wanted to do my job. But the Army had other plans. Our next mission was high priority. Eliminate a Taliban commander coordinating attacks on supply routes. Intel said he was smart, ruthless, and heavily protected. We tried to hit him 3 times before. This would be the 4th. Distance to target, I asked during briefing. 1,500 meters, Martinez said. Terrain's rough, winds unpredictable. If conditions aren't perfect, we abort. I can make the shot. "That's not the point," he said flatly. "This isn't a competition. You miss once and we're surrounded." He wasn't angry, he was scared for me. And I hated that because he was right to be. We moved under moonlight, climbing switchback trails that felt like the edge of the world. No sound but our breathing and the crunch of gravel under boots. By dawn, we reached our position. The valley below looked peaceful, again that cruel illusion. Through my scope I saw the compound, men moving, guards posted. Then the target. "Primary identified," Webb said softly. 1500 meters, wind east-southeast 18 knots. I slowed my breathing. The world shrank to crosshairs and distance. This was the kind of shot no one should attempt. But I wasn't no one. "Target isolated," Webb said. "Your call." The man stepped into the courtyard, sunlight hitting his face. He looked ordinary, too human for what came next. I squeezed the trigger. The sound reached us almost 2 seconds later, the dull, distant thud of impact. Through the scope the man dropped, no movement. "Target down," Webb confirmed. The valley exploded with chaos, shouting gunfire, trucks revving, fighters scrambling. "They're moving toward our position," Martinez shouted. We packed fast, rifles, rangefinders, spent shells, and began descending through the rocks. Bullets snapped overhead, hitting stone, the sound of war chasing us down the slope. When we finally reached the extraction point, the air was thick with dust and adrenaline. The helicopter's rotors thundered above, pulling us out of hell. As we lifted off, I looked back at the valley, the smoke rising, the chaos below. The shot had been perfect. The mission had been flawless. So why did it feel like I'd lost something I couldn't name? Back at base, Major Stone debriefed us. "Your shot today eliminated a high-value target responsible for countless American deaths," she said. "Outstanding work." I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. Because perfect shots don't fill the spaces they leave behind. That night I wrote a note in my field journal, something I still keep to this day. "The first kill teaches you fear. The second teaches you control. The third teaches you silence." I didn't know it then, but that silence, the space between what I did and who I was, would become the hardest battlefield of all. They don't tell you what happens after the silence. The first time you pull the trigger, your body reacts, adrenaline, focus, fear. The second time, your mind adjusts, justifying, rationalizing, coping. But after enough times, it's not your body or your mind that changes. It's your soul. And that's the part no one prepares you for. After the mission in Cara Valley, everything shifted. My name started showing up in reports, not as Private Whitaker, but as asset. The kind of word used for something valuable, but not entirely human. "Command wants you on more Overwatch assignments," Martinez told me. "You're officially our long-range specialist now." He said it like a compliment. It didn't feel like one. The missions came faster, each more dangerous, each further from sleep. I stopped keeping count of how many men I'd watched through a scope, how many faces I'd memorized in that final half-second before impact. People think war is chaos, noise, fire, panic. But for me, war was quiet. Too quiet. That's what haunted me the most. The quiet between breaths, between kills, between moments of pretending I was still the girl from Montana. One afternoon, the wind shifted hot, dry, carrying the smell of diesel and dust. I was cleaning my rifle when Webb walked in. He had that look again, the one that said something coming. "Command wants to see us," he said. We followed the narrow hall to the operations tent, where Major Stone stood beside a table covered in satellite images. Martinez was already there, his face tight. "This is Operation Falcon Veil," Stone began. "Intel just confirmed a high-level meeting between regional Taliban commanders near the Sangin district. If we disrupt it, We cripple their logistics chain for months." She looked at me. "We need Overwatch precision. You're the best shot we have." Her tone wasn't flattering, it was transactional. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a weapon they pointed at problems. "What's the distance?" I asked. "Between 2 and 2.5 kilometers," she said. "Wind patterns are unstable, terrain's brutal, but it's your window." "Ma'am, that's a record-breaking shot," Martinez said carefully. Stone nodded, exactly why she's on it. We deployed that night. The moon was thin, the air thick with heat. Every breath tasted like sand. The climb to the Overwatch ridge took hours. My legs burned. My shoulders ached from the rifle's weight. But the moment we reached the top, the exhaustion disappeared. Because down below, the valley pulsed with life, trucks arriving, torches flickering, armed men gathering around a small courtyard. I settled into position, adjusting for elevation, wind, and distance. Webb worked beside me, scanning through his spotter's scope. "Target 1 confirmed," he whispered. "Blue robe, white headscarf. Range 2,412 meters." "Winds shifting every 5 seconds," I said. "I'll need to time it perfectly." We waited. Minutes stretched into hours. My eye ached from the scope, but I didn't blink. Every heartbeat was a countdown. Then movement. The target stepped into the open, right where I needed him to be. I inhaled, exhaled, and squeezed. The shot echoed through the mountains, a low, distant sound swallowed by the wind. Through the scope, I saw the man drop. Perfect. Flawless. And yet, for the first time, it didn't feel like victory. "Target neutralized," Webb said. "Beautiful shot." I didn't answer. I was staring at something else. A young boy running into the courtyard, no older than 12, dragging his father's arm. The man was gone, but the boy didn't understand that yet. He just kept pulling, crying silently. I lowered the rifle. Something cracked inside me, not loud, not sharp, but deep. Like a fault line forming. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that boy. Not the shot, not the precision, just him. Grief has a sound, even when you're too far away to hear it. I went to the armory, needing the routine of cleaning my weapon to steady myself. Martinez found me there, sitting on a crate, rifle disassembled on the table. "You did your job," he said softly. "I know. Then what's eating you?" I hesitated. He had a son. Martinez sighed. "They all have someone. You think every man I've ever shot was alone in the world. You think that makes it easier. I didn't see him until it was too late." "You did what you were trained to do. Don't start doubting it now." But I already was. In the weeks that followed, something changed between me and the others. Whispers followed me wherever I went. "Too perfect. Doesn't even flinch. Not normal." Even Webb, my spotter, my partner, started keeping a distance. One afternoon, I found him by the motor pool, smoking with 2 engineers. When he saw me, he straightened. "Hey, Whitaker." I nodded. "Got a minute?" He looked at his boots, kind of in the middle of something. That's when I realized it wasn't just whispers, it was isolation. I'd become a myth inside my own unit. And myths don't get friends, they get fear. That night, I wrote in my field journal again. The more precise I become, the less human I feel. Maybe accuracy has a cost no one warned me about. A few days later, I was called back to the operations tent. Colonel Hayes was on video link from the States. "Whitaker," he said, his voice cutting through static. "We're tracking intel on a target linked to the Sangan Commander's network. Name's Abdul Rahman, high priority." The name hit me like a jolt. I'd seen it before in the Artemis files. My grandfather's last recorded mission had mentioned the same alias. "Sir," I said slowly, "this name, it's familiar." Hayes nodded. It should be. Rahman's father was one of the men your grandfather took down during Operation Hunter's Line in 1944. Seems the legacy continues. Legacy. That word again. It didn't sound like honor anymore. It sounded like a curse. Hayes continued, "We believe Rahman is operating out of a mountain stronghold in Nuristan. He's heavily protected. If we eliminate him, we disrupt a major terror network." He looked directly into the camera. "You're the only one with the range and stability to make this shot. The mission will be covert. No records, no recognition." I felt the compass in my pocket again. The weight of 2 generations pressing against my palm. "Understood, sir," I said. But as the screen went dark, I whispered to myself, "At what cost?" The mission prep took 3 days. I ran ballistic simulations, adjusted for humidity, air density, terrain elevation. Everything pointed to one truth. The shot would be nearly impossible, over 4,800 meters. Martinez paced behind me, shaking his head. "You shouldn't even be attempting this. It's beyond any confirmed range. You're playing God with math and wind." "Maybe," I said, "but someone has to try." He studied me for a long moment. "You're not doing this for command anymore, are you?" I looked at him. "No, I'm doing it for him." He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. The night before deployment, I found Webb sitting alone outside the barracks, looking at the stars. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "You're going after Rahman." "Yeah. You know this isn't about strategy anymore. It's personal." I sat beside him. Maybe personal is all that's left. He exhaled, smoke curling into the cold air. "You ever think about what happens after you take that shot, when there's no one left to aim at?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe that's when I'll finally rest." He shook his head. "No one like you ever rests, Whitaker. We just get quieter." Later that night, I wrote one final line in my journal before zipping it into my pack. "Tomorrow, I take the shot that will either define me or destroy me." Then I closed my eyes, knowing sleep wouldn't come, and waited for dawn. When I stepped outside the next morning, the horizon burned with orange light. Dust rose from the convoy tracks, and for a brief moment it almost looked beautiful, the kind of beauty that hides behind tragedy. Martinez met my gaze, ready. "As I'll ever be." We boarded the chopper. The rotors roared to life, and as the base fell away beneath us, I realized something. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even nervous. I just felt still. The kind of stillness that comes when everything inside you has already decided. We flew east toward Nuristan, toward the shot that would make history or break it, toward the ghost of my grandfather and the echo of every bullet that had ever left my barrel. I didn't know then what would happen. I didn't know how many lives would change in the seconds after that trigger pull. All I knew was that when I looked through that scope, I'd see more than a target. I'd see the cost of legacy, and whether I was strong enough to pay it. Why did the world feel suddenly smaller when I squeezed that trigger? Maybe because the moment between breath and impact folded time in on itself, a single breath carrying the weight of 100 decisions. We'd rehearsed the plan until the satellite maps were burned into our brains. Wind models, temperature gradients, Coriolis compensation, angle of fire, time of flight, a cascade of numbers that reduced life to math. But numbers don't hold hands when the decision is yours. They don't make the voice on the radio less human. They don't tell you what the boy in the courtyard will do when his father falls. They only tell you whether your calculations are sound. "Range?" Webb asked, voice low, professional. We were 3 men and a handful of worn equipment huddled on a ridge of shale and bone, more shadow than substance against a sky trying to decide if day would break. The scope felt heavier than normal, like a weight that had less to do with metal and more with expectation. 4,800 meters, I said. Saying it out loud made the number real. It made the historical comparison unavoidable. The instructors had written in their notes, "No confirmed kill beyond 2,700 meters." My grandfather's forbidden file had hinted at impossible distances, and now the mountain below us held a man whose life had been feeding nightmares for generations. My hands were steady, my heart was not. The calculations had been done again and again. The ballistic table printed and reprinted until ink blurred. Wind models predicted a window, a narrow one, where thermal currents would align and the projectile would behave like an obedient thing. Wind at altitude, inverse at ground level. Temperature differentials that would bend the bullet's path like a river around a rock. Time of flight nearly 2 seconds. 2 seconds for decisions. 2 seconds for consequence. Crosswind reading, south-southeast at 38 knots, Webb said, then added, gusting to 50 in pockets. Coriolis set for hemisphere. Time of flight, 1.9 seconds. Bullet drift calculated. Elevation compensated. You ready? I nodded, ready. There's a difference between being ready and convincing yourself you are. The line between confidence and hubris is a breath wide. Standing on that ridge, everything in me wanted to be the person who saw what needed to be done and did it without flinching. But under that desire was the rower thing. Fear I'd fail and take the men who trusted me with it all. They briefed us on rules of engagement, on positive ID, on collateral mitigation, the sterile language of making murder lawful. They reminded us of the lives saved by surgical removals of threats. They told us the boy in the courtyard is the sort of tragedy that haunts you for years, and then, with military efficiency, they turned the world back into a line item. Webb's finger tapped the spotting scope. Primary target moving into position. Visibility clear. He was calm in the way only people who have seen death repeatedly can be, not the absence of feeling but a contraction of it, like a muscle becoming used to strain. I settled the scope into place and let the world shrink to an illuminated rectangle. The compound sat like a wound in the earth. Buildings low, courtyards open, a handful of figures moving with the confidence of men insulated by power. Intelligence had given us a name, a file full of atrocity and logistics. Names don't feel like justice when you see the human standing behind them. Abdul Rahman walked like a man who belonged to no one but himself, surrounded by men who would die for him or because of him. My breath slowed into the ritual I'd practiced since the first time my grandfather had taught me to hold a rifle. Breathe in, hold, tune to the micro-movements, the faint shimmer of heat off the distant road, the slight wavering of a tail of dust, the rhythm of tribal life burned thin by danger. Time bent. I saw the path the round would take, the invisible physics sketched across the blue, the micro-winds nudging it left, then right, then left again. Frame, Webb whispered. You have movement left, he's stopping in the open. This was the window, the exact moment when mathematics and fate agreed. I exhaled, more slowly than seemed possible, and the rifle became a continuation of myself. The trigger pressed back with the soft resistance of inevitability. I remember thinking, fleetingly, of Montana's wide sky and how completely different a horizon looked when you were trying to hold a single hair of wind steady. The rifle barked. The sound thudded against my chest as if attempting to push into me rather than out. My world blurred for a millimeter, then focused. Through the scope, the target folded. He went down in a way that made everything too small, a single human body collapsing inside a story that had been growing for years. Trail of movement, then no movement. No dramatics, just an abrupt end. Target down, Webb said. His voice had the thin edge of shock and something like awe. It was the sound of a man who'd watched the impossible happen and had no proper word for it. The time of flight had been 1.88 seconds, my calculations spot on to 2 decimal places. Yet precision did not equal relief. In those seconds, 1,000 unanswerable questions flashed through me. Would he have been at the next convoy ambush? Would another child carry the blood of someone I'd been ordered to remove? Would my grandfather have recognized the pattern of pain where he'd left his mark? We packed. The extraction plan accounted for the immediate search and sweep, the predictable surge of fighters searching for the shooter. Ridges flamed with tracer fire as men scrambled beneath the moon. I moved fluidly, 3 years of training condensed into practiced muscle memory, and felt the adrenaline wash through me like cold water. We were hunted for 40 minutes that felt like years, then hours, then the kind of time that war invents to make memory brittle. When the rotors took us away, the compound grew small, smoke rising in tidy columns. Down there, men shouted and grieved. Up here, inside a helicopter that smelled of hydraulic fluid and sweat, I felt an emptiness the size of a canyon. Back at base, the debrief was the same choreography: congratulations, evaluations, a technical review that praised the shot as operationally decisive and historically significant. They filed it away in compendiums I would never see. Friendly officers smiled with the kind of warm distance trained into gestures that can be delivered from 1,000 yards. Colonel Hayes's voice came through on the secure line. Whittaker, exceptional execution. The analytics show an unprecedented correction matrix. You've broken prior range records. Broken, the word echoed in my skull. Records could be broken. People couldn't be unmade. We removed a strategic figure whose networks would undoubtedly suffer, whose plans would falter. That was the language of victory, but victory smelled different when it wasn't harvested with a name printed on a medal. Later, when the formalities had receded, when I finally let my hands stop moving, something else arrived. A quiet I hadn't felt before, heavy as a tombstone. It was the aftersound of taking life at that scale. I sat on my bunk and stared at my fingers, the tiny muscles that had moved with so much care. I pressed the brass compass against my palm until the edges bit. I hadn't told anyone about the journal in my grandfather's trunk, the classified lines that had suggested a lineage. I'd thought of him often on that ridge, the ghost of a man who'd once done something similar and been told to keep quiet. Did he feel what I did now? Had he, too, sat alone and folded his heart into a compass, engraving advice onto metal because words were too loud? Word reached us later, the kind that travels slow in conflict zones: collateral. A farmhouse outside the compound, a child wounded, not killed but forever rearranged. My stomach dropped like a gear skipping. We had done the mission. We disrupted a network. But the arithmetic of war is never clean. The cost prints itself on faces that stay with you. The moral strain wasn't immediate like physical pain. It was cumulative. It wrapped itself around small choices, choosing the aim point to minimize exposure but not knowing the people inside the courtyard, letting a patrol take a certain route that might have exposed them to less danger if past data had been different. Each choice that had once felt like engineering began to taste like ledger keeping. Soon after, whispers started. Not the overt hostility that Harris had once tried, but the quieter, more corrosive things, admiration mixed with suspicion. In the chow hall, men who once nodded now looked away. I sensed the line forming, respect edged with distance. "She's different," someone said. That difference became a moat. I found myself asking new questions in the dark between missions. Was I a tool or a person? A product of inheritance or a willful agent? Had the skill been my grandfather's gift, my family's biology, or years of stubborn practice under a sky that taught the wind? The Artemis file had once felt like an answer. Now it felt like a question with teeth. Sleep stopped being restorative and became a series of intervals where I tried to make sense of what I'd done. I would wake at odd hours with scenes playing back: a footprint in dust, the flutter of a curtain, a boy's hand gripping nothing. Sometimes I'd dream of numbers: time of flight, angle of attack, Coriolis drift, a calculus of destiny. Other times I'd dream of being back on the ranch, the smell of hay and a laugh that had nothing to do with war. There was pride, too, a raw, undeniable pride that I'd managed the impossible. It's a complicated animal. A part of me had wanted to be seen, to be more than the girl who watched the ranch die. I'd wanted to be useful, necessary, irreplaceable. The shot proved I was. but the proof arrived stamped in blood and smoke. Validation has a cruel currency. In the weeks that followed, my world narrowed further. More missions came with more stakes. The higher-ups started to look for me when problems were too knotty for ordinary solutions. Hayes's quiet congratulations gave way to pragmatic queries. What could be done with precision at standoff ranges? How could this be replicated? How far could the human eye be stretched into a weapon before it tore? I tried to answer them with data and discipline. I tried to convince myself that empathy would endure. But the moral architecture was changing. I felt small fissures forming in the person I'd been, a girl who'd thought skill was currency, and that spending it would fix the house, the family, the future. Instead, the cost was on the table, with my name on the receipt. One night Webb found me on the flight line, the wind picking up and carrying away small bits of desert into the dark. He didn't say anything at first. Then, "You okay?" His voice was the same one that had confirmed my hits, the same one that had steadied me on the ridge. I looked at him, and for a moment the world felt like a balanced scale. "I made the shot," I said. "It came out flat, factual, a statement of record." "You made history," he said, "but you look like you lost something." There was an honesty in him I trusted. "What do you want to do with it?" That question has followed me since. The shot existed now in a place with no applause and no parades, classified reports, grateful officers, and a boy in a farmhouse learning to put his life back together. I had changed the course of people's days, upended plans, shattered rituals. I had protected lives, that fact remained, but I had also, irrevocably, rearranged the world of those whose names I'd never know. There are moments when competence and conscience collide. I learned that the hard way. Competence can save you, conscience can save your soul. The skill that had opened a door for my family and my career had also opened an abyss I couldn't see across. Standing on the lip, I felt vertigo. So I started to keep a list, not of medals or records, but of faces. Not to quantify loss, but to remind myself of the human weight behind each calculation. It was a small act of rebellion against the machinery that had turned life into lines on a spreadsheet. To name a face is to stop it becoming a number. Later, when someone asked me what it felt like to be the one who did what no one else had, my answer was simple and dangerous. I felt necessary and haunted at once. That contradiction would become my companion. I slept poorly and dreamt of compasses, always compasses, engraved with old hands and newer ones, all pointing to the same center that was not honor nor glory but a steady, stubborn insistence. Aim with care, and remember why you are aiming at all. Why did the silence after a big mission feel louder than the gunfire itself? Maybe because it held all the things we refused to say aloud, the calculations we made for survival, the prayers we never sent, the names we never spoke. They debriefed me like I was a precision instrument. Numbers on one side of the table, humans on the other. Operationally decisive, they said, strategically invaluable. I read the words and felt none of their warmth. The phrase, "no friendly casualties," hung like a banner, and yet somewhere in the valley a boy was learning how to sleep with the ghost of his father's absence. That didn't fit neatly into charts. After the ramen shot, the base felt different. People looked at me not as a person but as an aperture into possibility. Officers asked cold, clinical questions. How repeatable was the process? What variables could be controlled? What training regimens produced this output? They wanted a blueprint. They wanted a method. I had none to give. You can teach technique. You can't manufacture the way a mind folds time and wind together. Hayes called me in one evening and said, "Your results are being circulated up the chain. There will be offers. There will be risks." He used the word offers like it was a simple menu. I thought of the brass compass in my pocket and the inscription my grandfather left me. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. I turned the compass and felt the dented metal as if it were my last tether to something human. People asked me what I felt after the shot. They wanted the cinematic closing. A sense of duty fulfilled, pride, maybe a quiet smile. They wanted neat endings. I had none of those. Instead, I had a slow, growing sense that I was being moved along a conveyor belt toward roles I hadn't chosen and futures I hadn't consented to. Then someone tried to take my work from me. A routine check of my rifle before a mission, the sort of ritual that used to calm me, turned into a small, bright panic. The scope turrets felt slightly off. The dovetail had a hairline of grit that hadn't been there. Not enough to ruin a shot, but enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up. The tampering was subtle, the kind designed to destabilize confidence rather than equipment. I thought of Harris right away. He'd been expelled during training for sabotage, the bitter little man who'd hated a girl who could outshoot him. He'd said things about need for diversity, about attention, about being a token. People who feel threatened don't always quit. Sometimes they find quieter ways to hurt. I reported it. Martinez listened, his face unreadable under his baseball cap. "We'll check the logs," he said, "but be careful who you accuse. This place chews on rumors and spits out reputations." The security footage showed someone in the armory at 200 moving a case. The person had a hood. The footage was grainy, not enough to condemn. Harris was the obvious suspect, but without proof, politics would turn the story into a morality play where I was either the persecuted genius or the provocateur. Either way, it cost me. Word spread that someone had tinkered with my scope. Men who already eyed me with a mix of fear and reverence now looked at me with meaner edges. The quiet became a pressure cooker. I cleaned my rifle until the metal warmed with my touch, until the smell of oil was the only real thing in the world. Logistics changed, too. More missions, larger windows, higher stakes. Hayes began asking about children and descendants in interviews that felt like cold interrogations. "We're managing risk for the future," he said. "It's about stewardship." Stewardship for whom? For the Army, for families, for a program that traced handed-down traits like threads through time. The Artemis program shadowed me even more tightly. Some days it felt like an honor. Other days it felt like a leash. They ran tests on me. I didn't ask for cognitive latency checks that mapped how quickly my brain made ballistic estimations, ocular stress tests that measured how my pupils tracked micro-movements. I learned to treat them like weather, a phenomenon to note and predict, not a verdict. One evening, after a mission that had gone predictably sideways, a convoy ambushed, a door kicked off its hinges, I sat with Webb on the low concrete wall that edged the perimeter. He pulled a cigarette from a pack he'd sworn he'd quit and offered it without looking at me. He never smoked often. It was his way of slowing things down. "You all right?" he asked after the first drag. His face was bruised by fatigue. "You seem different." "I am different," I said. "I feel like I'm losing track of what I was before all this." Webb shrugged. "Maybe you were never the sort for small towns and hay bales." His voice was soft, that careful neutrality soldiers learn to use when friends are unraveling. "Maybe you were always meant for this." I looked at him, and for a second I wanted to believe it. It would be easier if destiny were kind. It would be easier if purpose didn't come bundled with cost. The next 2 months blurred with missions, overwatches, targeted strikes, route clears, each one competent, surgical, and increasingly anonymous. I began keeping a ledger in the back of my journal, not the dry report of hits and ballistics, but the faces that stayed with me. The boy in the courtyard. The woman who'd handed a plate of rice to our patrol in a village where we later found a cache. The old man who'd watched us from behind a shutter and never looked the same again. Writing the names down was my resistance against becoming a file. Then came the mission that nearly broke what little I had left. It was a reconnaissance push meant to locate a weapons stash before a convoy moved through a narrow pass. Intelligence was thin, a rumor stitched from informant interviews and satellite shadows. The plan was simple. We'd move in at night, set observation points, call for extraction if compromised. We moved like ghosts, 3 moving figures slipping over rocks, the dark a fabric we wove ourselves into. My rifle hugged me like a second skin. The only sounds were soft boots and our breathing. Webb signaled a halt and pointed a plume of smoke rising from a hut, light like a wound. Figures moved. Too many for a single stash. Movement suggested ambush. We fed the intel back to Martinez. He frowned. "Abort and regroup," he ordered. "We're in deep if that's an ambush." We dropped into the rocks and began to unwind the approach. That's when the world in front of me erupted. I felt it before I heard it, the strike of metal on air, the chemical scent of explosives. The ground shifted as if someone had moved the earth, and then there was pain that had nothing to do with wounds and everything to do with shock. Someone screamed. A ricochet slammed into the rock beside my head and sprayed grit into my mouth. For a blank second, the world was a kaleidoscope of noise and light. When the ringing faded, our formation had fractured. Webb lay with a gash along his temple, blinking slow like someone who'd forgotten to wake. Martinez shouted orders, face streaked with grime. We moved, but movement was a new thing now, not the practiced ballet of trained soldiers, but a raw scramble for survival. We were outnumbered and out of position. The ambushers had known our route. They'd prepared. It felt deliberate, like a lesson. Each of us felt a cold whisper. Someone had tipped them off. As bullets cracked overhead, I counted not distances this time, but people. How many, where, who covered which approach. I took shots when I had clear lanes, each one a deferral of disaster. We improvised a withdrawal point and executed it with the rigid calm that training carves into you. By the time the dust settled, we'd escaped with injuries and bruises, but the cost was weighty. We had lost the element of surprise, and Webb's wound was worse than first seen. Concussion protocol meant he couldn't be back in the field for a while. In the after-action, Martinez's jaw clenched like a trap. "This was set up," he said. "Somebody fed them our pattern. Someone up the chain shared a schedule, or someone in base leaked it." His eyes met mine with a question not asked aloud. Was I so valuable my presence put us at risk? I wanted to scream that the target patterns weren't mine to command. I wanted to say that I wasn't the reason we'd walked into that hole. But the unit is a machine that doesn't like noise. Lives had been at risk. Someone would be blamed, and if I didn't pick up the scent first, the hunt would come for me. I started tracing back permissions, orders, and comms. It wasn't paranoia. It was procedure. Patterns emerge when you look for them. I found a sliver, an order that had been routed through a junior intelligence officer who'd been transferred in from a different fob only days earlier. He had a record, thin but suspicious. Disciplinary notes about loose talk and a tendency to befriend contractors whose loyalties were shaky. It was circumstantial, but it was something. When I brought it to Martinez, he didn't look surprised. "We'll handle it," he said, quietly. "Or we expose a mole and create a mess that reaches ears we don't want reaching this base," I added. His silence was an answer. Sometimes survival means choosing which wars you fight and which you swallow. So we dug, but quietly. We watched cameras, read logs, and conducted interviews in the way you do when you don't want to start a panic. The patterns tightened around a small group of men with agendas of their own, profiteers who'd been selling timing and routes for years, soft men with hard pockets. Harris's name drifted again like a fish under the surface, but this time he was a small tributary in a larger stream. We found the connection in a contractor's manifest, a string of payments traced back to a shell company with links to local power brokers, names hid behind other names. The trail led us to people whose faces I'd eaten with in mess halls and whose hands shook over paperwork in offices. Corruption in war is not dramatic. It is a slow, bureaucratic erosion. We moved carefully. We didn't arrest anyone that day. You don't break a network with headlines. You dismantle it in pieces. The optics of a base-wide purge would be catastrophic. Morale, intelligence sharing, and local politics would all suffer. Martinez's quiet approach was right, but part of me wanted to see the men who'd endangered us called to account under lights and cameras. Instead, 3 contractors were quietly reassigned out of theater. The junior officer received a stern reprimand and then a transfer. Harris. He showed up later, not as a saboteur, but as a small-time fixer whose bitterness had found currency in rumor. He was punished as well, but the sense that someone had intentionally targeted us never left me. That mission left deeper marks than the bullet wounds. It gave me a new understanding of how fragile the line was between trust and betrayal. It taught me that enemies wear many faces, not just the ones in the valley, but those with office desks and clean coffee mugs. It taught me to be less naive about loyalty and more careful with the truths I trusted to people. I sat one night with my journal open and wrote, "I am learning the anatomy of war. It is bone and muscle and paper. It is contracts and whispers. If I want to survive and protect the people I love, I have to be more than a marksman. I have to be a listener, a reader of human errors and petty ambitions." There was also anger now, threaded with grief. The kind that wakes up in the middle of the night and presses cold fingers to your throat. Anger at those who commodified violence for profit. Anger at leaders who fetishized capability without caring for cost. Anger at the idea that I had been turned into an asset without being asked whether I consented. Most of all, there was resolve. Not the blinding kind that thought violence could fix everything, but the steadier version. To keep a ledger, to insist on humanity, and to remember that every target had a life before we made them a line in a report. Some nights Webb would stop by to check in. He wasn't the same. The concussion had taken things from him a little at a time, reflexes, maybe, or a confidence that had once been solid as oak. He'd look at me with the same tired appraisal. The machine had to keep moving and we were its parts. "Don't let them turn you into a number," he said once, voice rough. "They'll try." I put the compass to my lips and swallowed a thought they already had. But a compass can be turned and a person can choose a path. I would choose mine. Slowly, quietly, like someone carving a hidden message into a worn piece of wood. The war kept moving, so would I. Why did the stars look sharper in war? Maybe because you only truly notice beauty when you're surrounded by things that can destroy it. After the ambush, after the lies, after the near-fatal night that turned us into suspects instead of soldiers, something in me changed. Not the part that shot straight, that still worked like clockwork, but the part that used to believe precision could save me. The missions didn't stop. They never do. Orders kept coming like tidewater, steady, inevitable, cold. But I wasn't the same sniper who'd climbed those mountains the first time. I moved differently now. Not with arrogance or fear, but with awareness. I'd seen how betrayal could wear the same uniform as trust. How people could weaponize loyalty. 2 weeks after the ambush, I was sitting alone at the range, cleaning my rifle under the morning sun. The valley wind hummed against the steel targets. Dust flickered like static in the light. Martinez approached, quiet as always. He carried a folder under his arm. "Got new orders?" I asked. He nodded. "You're being reassigned." My hands froze mid-motion. Reassigned. "Temporary rotation," he said carefully. "Classified, higher clearance than before." I set the rifle down. "Colonel Hayes." He didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. "What kind of operation?" "Joint tasking, intelligence and overwatch coordination." They didn't give details, only that you're the only one cleared for it. I studied him. "You don't like it." "I don't like ghosts making requests through encrypted channels." There was something behind his tone, not suspicion, but concern. He'd seen what secrecy did to people. "Be careful," he said finally. "Whatever this is, it's bigger than one shot." They flew me out 2 nights later. No insignia, no flag patches, no answers. Just coordinates and silence. The transport dropped me at a forward observation post near the Pakistani border, a place that didn't exist on any map. When the rear ramp opened, Heat and rotor wash hit me at once. A man in civilian clothes waited at the edge of the landing zone. Sunglasses, beard, calm as a priest. "Whitaker," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Lang. Welcome to Outpost Black." The way he said it flat, measured, told me he was CIA. We walked through rows of tents and antennas, cables snaking through dust. Every face that looked at me seemed to be evaluating, calculating. This wasn't a military post. It was a chessboard. Inside the command tent, Lang handed me a tablet showing satellite images. A convoy, a hillside village, and a face. "This is our target," he said. "Khalid Wazir. Coordinates supply networks across the tribal belt. We've tried to hit him twice, both times he slipped. We think he's being tipped off." I looked closer. Tipped off by who? "That's what you're here to help us find out." He pointed to a small circle drawn near the convoy route. "We'll have a local informant in that area tomorrow. If Wazir's convoy changes direction, it means he knew, and we'll know who warned him." "So I'm not just shooting," I said. Lang smiled slightly. "You're watching, listening, reading wind and people." It was strange. For once, they wanted me for my mind, not just my trigger finger. That night I couldn't sleep. The camp generator hummed like a heartbeat, the desert wind whispering against the tent canvas. I sat outside under a sky so vast it looked like it could swallow everything: guilt, pride, purpose. The stars burned steady above, millions of years old, untouched by any war. And yet down here, every one of us was just trying to survive the next sunrise. I pulled out my grandfather's compass. The brass caught moonlight, the engraving almost faded now. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. I whispered it out loud, as if saying it might make it mean something again. Morning came sharp and bright. Lang briefed us before sunrise. "Whitaker, you'll have overwatch from the western ridge, range 1,000 yards. You'll be monitoring the convoy route and any radio traffic we pick up. If you see movement that confirms compromise, signal us." He handed me a small encrypted transmitter. "Don't fire unless absolutely necessary," he added. "This isn't about kills, it's about truth." The climb was brutal. The ridge was jagged limestone, cutting through my gloves. The rifle pressed into my shoulder like a promise. By noon, I was in position. Heat shimmered over the horizon. Through my scope, the world blurred and sharpened, the kind of distortion that makes time feel slow. The convoy appeared, 5 vehicles kicking up dust trails. Everything matched the plan. Then, 20 minutes before the intercept, movement. A lone motorbike cutting across the valley fast, too fast. I radioed Lang. "Unidentified rider approaching convoy from the east, possible scout." "Copy," he said. "Do not engage." The rider slowed near the lead truck, waved once, then turned back. Seconds later, the convoy swerved off route, precisely the direction of the alternate escape path we'd been monitoring. "They knew," I whispered. Lang's voice came through, cold and clipped. "Copy confirmation, abort operation, return to base." But as I lowered the rifle, something in my gut twisted. The rider, I'd caught his face for a second through the scope. Young, barely 20. American. Back at the base, Lang was waiting. He didn't look surprised when I told him. "That's the problem we've been dealing with," he said quietly. "Inside leaks, contractors selling intel, the kind of corruption that doesn't make headlines because it wears a clean uniform." "Who was he?" I asked. Lang hesitated. "Someone you used to know." He slid a file across the table. And when I opened it, my stomach dropped. "Staff Sergeant Mason Webb." No, not Webb. Not the man who'd sat beside me under stars and told me to never become a number. The photo was grainy, the timestamps undeniable, payment records, communications with intermediaries, coordinates matching our last compromised missions. I stared at it, waiting for denial to form, but it didn't. Lang's voice softened. We don't think he sold for greed, maybe for guilt. Maybe someone got to him, but we can't afford sentiment. The words hit harder than any bullet. Where is he? I asked. Somewhere near Jalalabad. We're tracking. He looked at me carefully. When we find him, what would you do? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. That night the wind howled outside the tents. I sat with the compass in my palm, staring at the engraving like it might give me answers. True aim comes from the heart. But what if the heart was the very thing tearing me apart? Webb, my spotter, my brother-in-arms, had been the only person who saw the person behind the rifle, the man who'd whispered warnings when I stopped recognizing myself. And now they were telling me he was the reason men had died. I wanted to believe they were wrong. I wanted to believe he was still out there, trying to fix something in his own broken way. But I'd also seen the other side of war, the one where conviction curdles into survival, where soldiers do things they swore they never would, just to keep breathing. So I sat under a sky full of indifferent stars, and I made a silent promise. If I found him, I'd find out the truth, even if it killed whatever was left of me. Why did it have to be him? That question kept looping in my mind, long after the radio went silent and the dust settled on Outpost Black. When Lang showed me Webb's file, it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like déjà vu, like the same ache that runs through generations of soldiers who learn that loyalty has an expiration date. But Webb wasn't just a fellow sniper or a spotter. He was the one who kept me human when the rifle wanted to turn me into math. And now they said he'd sold us. That he'd sold me. They didn't order me to find him, not at first. Lang wanted to handle it quietly, through channels. But channels have leaks, and bureaucracy moves slower than blood. So I volunteered for a mission I wasn't officially assigned to. Lang looked at me for a long time before answering. You understand what this means, right? If you go after him, it's not about revenge. It's about truth, and truth in this world isn't clean. I nodded. I'm not looking for clean. He sighed, then slid a single photo across the table. A dusty checkpoint, a hillside village. And there, blurred but unmistakable, Webb's profile in the corner. That was all I needed. 3 days later, I was deep in Nuristan again. Same mountain, same dry wind, same ghosts. The helicopter dropped me miles from the village, too far for anyone to hear or see. I moved on foot, climbing ridges by moonlight, boots grinding gravel into silence. Every step was a memory. The same place where I'd made the impossible shot now felt smaller, more human, like the land itself was watching me return with unfinished business. By dawn, I had eyes on the village. And there he was. Webb sat alone outside a crumbling building, rifle across his lap. No uniform, no insignia. Just a man who looked older than the last time I'd seen him, the lines on his face carved deep, like guilt had been etching them one by one. I steadied my scope, but I couldn't bring myself to align the crosshairs. I'd spent years mastering the art of distance, and now I couldn't close it. I needed to see him. Face to face. He didn't flinch when I approached. Didn't reach for his rifle. He just looked up and said, "I knew you'd come." I stopped a few feet away, boots sinking into the dust. Why? He smiled, not cruelly, not bitterly, just tired. Because you're the only one who still believes in asking that word before pulling the trigger. Lang thinks you're a traitor. Lang thinks in black and white. I said nothing. The wind filled the silence between us. Finally, he stood. You remember that convoy we were protecting near Sangin, the one that got ambushed? I nodded slowly. We lost 2 men. They were carrying medical supplies for locals, But one of the CIA teams, Lang's team, rerouted part of that convoy to trade with a warlord. Payment for intel. The ambush wasn't random, Emily. It was retaliation. I blinked. You're saying Lang sold us out? Not sold, bartered. He rubbed the back of his neck. And I found out. I sent the coordinates ahead not to the Taliban but to civilians. Told them to evacuate before the firefight. But word spread, got twisted. Someone tipped both sides. You know the rest. I wanted to believe him. God, I did. But belief in war is a fragile thing. One you learn not to trust without proof. Then why run? I asked. He looked at me, eyes hollow. Because Lang doesn't deal in truth. He deals in control. I tried to report it and suddenly I was the leak. I stayed off-grid to stay alive. You could have told me. He smiled faintly. Would you have listened? Back then, you were still trying to prove you weren't a myth. The words cut deeper than I expected. We sat there for a long time. No guns, no orders, no ranks. Just two people with sand in their hair and too many ghosts between them. Why didn't you shoot me? He asked quietly. Because I didn't come here to kill you, I said. I came here to understand. He nodded slowly as if that was enough. Then understand this, they'll never let people like us go home clean. We know too much and we see too far. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of smoke from somewhere distant. A reminder that even when the war sleeps, it never dies. By the time I returned to Outpost Black, Lang was waiting. Did you find him? He asked. I did. And he's not your leak, I said flatly. He was trying to protect civilians. Lang's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Whitaker, you've done incredible things for this country. Don't ruin it by sympathizing with ghosts. Maybe ghosts are the only ones still telling the truth, I said. He leaned closer. Be careful, Sergeant. Heroes and traitors are only separated by paperwork. He left and I knew that was my last day under his command. A week later, I was flown out of Afghanistan. No ceremony, no farewell. Just a seat on a plane filled with quiet men and women who'd learned that silence was safer than pride. When the wheels lifted off, I looked down at the mountains one last time, those endless ridges where I'd learned how far a bullet could travel and how little distance it could cover between right and wrong. Home didn't feel like home. Montana was colder, emptier. The ranch was gone, sold to pay debts while I was overseas. Mom had moved into town. Dad's old hat hung on the wall of the diner. People smiled politely when they learned I was the girl sniper. They wanted stories about precision, heroism, medals. I gave them silence instead. Because the truth isn't something you share. It's something you carry. One evening, I drove out to the edge of the old property, to where the grass met the horizon. The wind was softer here, kinder. I took the compass from my pocket, ran my thumb across the engraving. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. For the first time, I understood what it meant. It wasn't about shooting straight. It was about living straight, seeing clearly when lies blurred the world, and still choosing to act with decency. I thought about Webb, somewhere out there, maybe still running, maybe finally resting. I thought about Martinez, about the boy in the courtyard, about my grandfather and the silent generations before me. And I realized something simple, something I'd been missing all along. You don't carry legacy by repeating it. You carry it by forgiving what it made you. The wind picked up, whispering through the dry grass. I closed my eyes and listened. And in that sound, I heard everything I'd been chasing, not glory, not redemption, but peace. A quiet kind, fragile but real. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is finally put the rifle down.